Hey YouTube, Smiling Skeptic here again with another video on Islam. Seems I've been doing a lot of these lately. There's been a lot of discussion about Sharia law on YouTube recently. I'm a Canadian, and Canada already has experience with the concept of installing a court of Sharia law, and I feel that that experience is worth sharing. There are links to source material in the Under There bar.
Say underwear.
Okay, so this is Canada. All 10 provinces and 3 territories. The territories are the cold bits up north. The province of Ontario is Canada's most populous province and the most multicultural. This is the setting for today's lesson. Okay, so the province of Ontario passed something called the Arbitration Act in 1991. It allowed for the creation of faith-based tribunals that would have authority in arbitration agreements. These would be things like some family and civil cases, and the cases would be decided by the tribunals according to the principles of their respective faiths. Criminal cases would still proceed through the regular channels. It was wrapped up and sold in a very attractive package. These tribunals would take some of the lesser items off the court dockets and help alleviate the growing backlog of cases in the courts for things like custody, inheritances, divorce, and so on. If a person didn't dedicate a lot of thought to it, it sounded like a good idea, and for some 12 years things went reasonably well. Catholic and Jewish communities used these tribunals to arbitrate civil claims. There were some protests about the constitutionality of these tribunal courts, but these protests failed to gain traction with the public due to a general lack of complaints originating from the system. Then in 2003, the constitutional rubber hit the proverbial asphalt as the Islamic Institute of Civil Justice announced its intentions to use this Arbitration Act to create Islamic tribunals for the citizens of Ontario. Other groups, such as the Muslim Lawyers Association based in Toronto, supported the movement, insinuating that if Canada wanted to consider itself truly multicultural, Canadians would not oppose the creation of the Islamic tribunals. They further argued that it was a way for cultural groups to establish autonomy for themselves within the state, giving Canadians an uneasy sense that this was just the beginning of something beyond these tribunals. It was essentially a given that rulings of any Islamic tribunal would be based in Sharia law, but Muslim groups who sought the creation of these tribunals shied away from using phrases like Sharia law and were decidedly dodgy when answering direct questions about whether this meant the installation of a Sharia court in Canada. The only thing angrier than a beaver with a chainsaw dipped in hot sauce is a Canadian who's suspicious they're being hoodwinked. The public suspected the Islamic Institute of Civil Justice was being less than honest about its intentions and saw the slippery slope to Sharia law courts in Ontario. In December of 2004, former Attorney General Marion released an in-depth report on the effectiveness of the religious tribunals since the creation of the 1991 Act. The report was to maintain an eye toward documenting abuses and unfair treatment of vulnerable groups such as women, the elderly, or the disabled. The report found no significant abuses or unfair treatment due to the effective use of safeguards and regulations built into the Act. The report further recommended that these tribunals be allowed to continue as long as these safeguards were kept in place. This only turned up the heat on the issue of the introduction of Sharia law into Ontario. It became a huge political powder keg as horror stories of the application of Sharia law in other countries were highlighted in the news. Sharia law is more than just a system of law prescribed by the Quran and the Hadith. It's an essential part of everything it means to be a complete Muslim. You see, Islam is not just a religion based on some dusty old dog-eared book created by a superstitious and unenlightened civilization. It's a whole system of governance that encompasses how you live your life, how you govern yourself and your nation, how you conduct your worship, a system of justice, Sharia, for both civil and criminal law, all based on some dusty old dog-eared book created by a superstitious and unenlightened civilization. The stories of utter tragedy under Sharia law, mostly of women, are innumerable and stomach-churning. If I got started on the horrors of Sharia law in the hands of fundamentalists, I'd be here all night, maybe some other time. Establishing a Sharia tribunal court, even just to arbitrate civil cases, is a small step toward the establishment of a larger body of Sharia law. There are 2 ways to view small steps. One is as a positive, as in the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and the other is as a negative. Once the camel's nose is in the tent, his body is sure to follow. Ontario Premier Dalton McGuinty saw the potential implications of the equality argument for the creation of a Sharia court and understood the deeply fundamental and persistent issues of incompatibility therein. To defuse the situation, McGuinty made the only decision he really could have made. Citing a need to re-clarify the boundaries between church and state, he did away with all faith-based tribunals, declaring one law for all as the only real way to guarantee equality under the Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. The Arbitration Act continues, but in an amended form, no longer allowing arbitration hearings to be held using religious principles. Some moderate Muslims, mostly women, openly celebrated the Premier's announcement, expressing fear of what could have been under Sharia law if it had been commandeered by fundamentalists. The religious tribunals in Ontario are now a historical footnote, as an interesting experiment in the true meaning of equality as it pertains to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, religious freedoms, and justice. Some of the activist groups who successfully advocated the abolition of these faith-based tribunals are now using the momentum to push for the adoption of one secular school system in Ontario, with the objective of finally doing away with religious schools and their boards. That's going to be a longer fight, as it means taking on the well-established Catholic schools and their school boards. Thus endeth the lesson. I'm Smiling Skeptic, reminding you to fight the good fight, but don't get dirty about it. Be excellent to each other, and peace.
Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.